Hello, everybody. Pleasure to be with you. Welcome to the Unit 3 of Module 3, Managing Religious Diversity. In the Unit 3, we will cover Judaism and Islam. I will give a short overview of both religions and develop practical issues concerning health. So let's start with Judaism. Judaism is probably the oldest monotheistic religion in the world. Its followers consider, these letters here, to be the only God, and that name has not been pronounced since ancient times. So it is not even know what its exact sound is. The second book of Moses, Exodus, translated as I am he who is. This tetragram was considered so sacred that it was replaced during prayers with the word Adonai, my Lord. This custom has continued to the present day. The name Judaism is late and does not come from the Jews, but from Roman texts. Judaismus means the religion of the Jews. The Jews instead prefer to speak of this as the Torah, which is the name of their sacred writings, and of themselves as Israel, the nation that wrestled with God. Judaism originated in the territory of the so-called Fertile Crescent, stretching from the Red Sea and Sinai along the Mediterranean and the Tigris and Euphrates rivers to the Persian Gulf. The beginning of covenant history, as described in Genesis, is the subject of various hypotheses and disputes among historians. Most assume that the era of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob falls during the second millennium. Moses, on the other hand, would have led Jews out of Egypt somewhere around 1200, 1300 before Christ. A more certain dating concerns the era of the Judges and King Saul, David, and Solomon. Judaism is based on faith in a single God. Through Abraham, made a covenant with the Jews and then sent them the Torah, which is his word, handed down through Moses and the prophets. And the covenant obliged God to provide the Jews with descendants and a land, Alsace, that will belong to them, and the Jews to testify that God is one. The Jews therefore feel themselves to be chosen people in order to bear witness to God in the world by their existence and their faithfulness. The most important confession of faith is Hear, O Israel, Shema Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. One, of course, mentioning Judaism has to mention Torah, the holy book. The Torah is a holy book given by God to Moses 50 days after the exodus from Egyptian slavery. The Torah was not given us to be read like literature, but to be used to teach us how to live properly. The Torah is meant to guide the Jew along the path of life like any traffic code. It must be understandable in order for it to fulfill its function. Every Jew is obliged to study its books and to follow its precepts in everyday life. So it's also important to mention Talmud. Talmud is a collection of explanation of the Torah or the word heard by the prophets and recorded. What are the most important points in symbolism in Judaism? So the Star of David comes from the Hebrew Magen David, which literally means shield of David. According to Jewish tradition, King David's soldiers wore the hexagram on their shields to ensure God's protection. It is found not only in synagogues and on Jewish tombstones, but also on the state's flag of Israel. In 20th century, the Nazis forced Jews to wear a yellow Star of David on their arm, a sign of stigmatization and separation of the descendants of Israel from the rest of humanity. A seven-branch standing candlestick with candle holders placed at one high is a symbol signifying light and eternal life. In the original hut, it was used to illuminate the holy place. Of course, Judaism, as every religion, differs inside. So we have different segments, different groups of Jews. So let's start from traditional Judaism. Haredim are believers for whom the meaning of life is the observance of the law. To make this possible, they necessarily lock themselves within their communities. Their way of life, eating, dressing, studying and working, spending their free time, is in accordance with traditional halakha. Its radical requirements mean that these Jews tend not to participate in the life of the secular world, and if they do, it is on their own terms. A special role in the lives of such people is played by prayer and the rhythm of holidays, Shabbat every week and others every year. The second division would be conservatism Judaism, which introduces a hierarchy of prohibition and precepts. Unlike traditional Judaism, it believes that some rules are inalienable and others can be omitted. This allows its followers to participate in the secular world. It is an intermediate movement between the Reform, advocating the retention of Hebrew in the liturgy, the preservation of the Sabbath, and kosher regulations. Now we have also two more, just like progressive and or Reform Judaism and humanist Judaism. So progressive Judaism differs from the traditional conservatism Judaism primarily in recognition of Jewish law and is historical and subject to reform, the equality of women in the liturgy, the introduction of freedom to observe strict kosher regulation, and the observance of the Sabbath, making it easier for Jews to function in modern societies. While humanist Judaism is more about, the cultural experience and what are the main point of Jewish traditions? Of course, this is just like refinement. So Jews pray in the morning, at noon, and in the evening. Prayers are recited according to Jewish law. Jews pray with their face facing Jerusalem, standing, sitting, or swaying in their whole body. Each person praying has his or her head covered and is dressed in special prayer garments. An important religious meeting place is the synagogue, which is not a temple. The temple can only be found on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Of course, also there is Shabbat, it was already mentioned, which is a weekly celebration of creation. For 6 days, according to the holy text, for 6 days God worked, and the seventh he rested. So did the Jews. In Judaism, the word holy refers only to God and the Sabbath. This holiday is governed by its own law. One must not work, and one must separate oneself and his or her family from the worries of everyday life. According to the Jewish calendar, the Sabbath begins after sunset on Friday and lasts until sunset on the following day. This day is the greatest Jewish holiday and also an important act of faith for every Jew. So, what are the examples of activities prohibited on the Sabbath? So, these are traveling, lighting fires, using electrical appliances, cutting fruits or vegetables, baking, cooking, cutting nails, tying and untying knots, applying cream on your skin, using bar soap, and writing. Okay, thank you very much for listening lecture number 1. In the next lecture number 2, I will develop the topic of Judaism and healthcare. Thank you.